Why are we interested in newspapers? Michel de Certeau talks about the practice of everyday life, and all the different types of ways that the idea of the mundane is where culture is formed, right? And I think newspapers, like I was saying, is the pulse of a society. Um, when anything is happening, and we see how much, if you think about the culture of disinformation that we have been battling with, for I would say for the last decade, news becomes such a big part of how our political climate is framed, our approach to some of the world's biggest issues, including climate change, uh, you know, and all kinds of questions about environment, poverty, global inequality. All of these questions are framed and filtered through the media in some way. Newspapers are the way people, and newspapers in whatever form you want to consider. Now we're talking about digital newspaper. Most papers are online now, so we're looking at a different type of dynamic. But historically, and I think we're having this conversation right now because the owners of broad media companies really originated from newspaper culture, right? So if you think of the Murdochs and you think of people going all the way back who have had a pulse on the political issues or the political needle, have come from from media. And so this is why we think about newspapers as revealing the practice of everyday life, both in the way the news and media influence our daily lives, but also in the way that it also reports on and shares a window into this particular moment for us. So we want to create and engage in imagined communities. And this is from Benedict Anderson. Benedict Anderson has a follow-up book to Imagine Communities, where he really goes into the work of newspapers in South Asia. The name of the book is blanking me now, but it's his book after Imagine Communities, and he talks about the kind of serialized thinking and serialized nationalism that comes out of how central newspaper work is to post-colonial communities, particularly in this instance. So this is another area. We want to engage the silences around representation. Of course, I think the idea of silencing and what is quiet in the text is something that literary scholars kind of think about a lot. And I know historians have been coming back to the archive with questions. We see a lot of the work coming out of Global South considerations of history, slavery, have really focused on silences in the archive. And I think that is something that we want to observe in the newspapers as well. Newspaper data offers a portal into new and emerging research questions. So things that you didn't know are always what happens when you encounter the mundane. And I'm going to use an example which I will test for you when we get to our demo section, that when I was doing literary societies research, I use this example quite a bit when I teach my digital humanities course, which I've been doing in Dominica for a while. I was looking at a lot of Dominican newspapers, both on DLOC, what was available on DLOC, as well as in the National Archives in Dominica. And I stumbled upon this thing that's called a wife notice. And the wife notice says, I, so-and-so man, publicly acknowledge that my wife, I am no longer responsible for the debts of my wife, whatever her name is, because she has left my house. And I was like, this is a public announcement in the news, kind of like a little box, like a liquor license, right? And so I was like, intrigue. And I recognized the last name because Dominica has 70,000 people. We're very, very small. So you kind of know people who know people. So I asked my friend, is that your grandfather? Like, why is he like publicly divorcing his wife? So then I kept looking into research. It was just one thing. Then I found another one. And so now I forgot that I had work to do, and I'm looking for the wife notices. I find one with the last name Esprit. So now it's over. I was like, scandal, I have to go find. So I called my uncle. I said, tell me about this wife notice. And he laughs and he's like, yeah, people used to do that when their wives. But I'm just like, wives are not posting that their husbands left them in the paper. Tell me more about this, right? So it turns out that, because of colonialism, Dominica is a predominantly Roman Catholic country. And I think this was also true for not just Dominica, but other islands, although I haven't traced it in the other islands, that the wife notice was posted because divorce was not legal. And a lot of women who wanted to leave their husbands didn't have any mechanism for doing so, right? So we can talk about all of the history of patriarchy and misogyny that's tied to that. And then he explained that before I think it was 1981, divorce was not even a legal option by court. And so when families separated, there had to be a way for people to know that they were separated, but it's always initiated by the man who felt slighted. And also because of patriarchy and the history of these countries, a woman was always known as Mrs. by the man's name. And so when people collected credit was a word of mouth system. So a woman could go credit on her husband's name at any shop, any grocery store, and her husband would usually pay at the end of the month for all the bills. And that was the credit system. It was an honor system. So the announcement in the newspaper was to let the creditors know that my wife cannot charge anything to my account, primarily, right? And so the more I looked into the wife notice, I had no idea this was going on, and it just presented a whole. Now, have I had time to work on the wife notice? No, but this is something that I have now. I look for it every time. No matter what I'm looking at, I need to find a new wife notice to add to my collection, right? And every time I find a name of someone who is a friend of mine, I call them. I'm like, so then I find out this one who is a friend of mine, and I said, she's like, let me tell you what happened. So her mom gets on the phone and tells me the scandal of how, there was someone caught someone cheating, and there was so all of these kinds of mundane stories have come out of DLOC by accident, right? And so I have new questions. You see how I had created new questions from that research, because I now want to understand marriage in the context of a society that women don't have an identity outside of their husbands, right? I have all kinds of new research questions. Had I been interested in gender and sexuality at a moment in my career where I had the time to devote to this, I would just drop what I was doing and just do that, because there were so many emerging research questions. So I started telling my friends who were gender and sexuality scholars, you need to look into this and see if other islands have this wife notice. And I found that some islands do. So just to give you an example of what happens in the moment of encounter, that why newspaper data becomes important, because a little notice that looks like a liquor license has led to a whole new stream of thinking around gender and acts of feminism. These women just get up and go. And sometimes the husbands say that they left the children. So I have questions, right? So this is just one of the examples.